Greetings and welcome to the latest edition of the Entheogenic Evolution Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Martin, and I'm happy to have you with me today. For this week's episode, my guest is author and couples therapist, Jonathan Robinson, and he is here to talk all about his new book, Ecstasy for Couples. Yes, he is a couples therapist who works with couples with MDMA and provides them therapy while working with the medicine. We had a fascinating conversation. I'm excited to bring this to you today, but first, let me just give a few announcements before we get into our conversation, which was held a few weeks ago at this point. I had a couple of things that I wanted to bring your attention to regarding the Entheogenic Evolution YouTube channel. The first is that the other week I made a short video, certainly short for me, it's only 22 minutes long, and in that video I discuss the question of why and how 5-MeO-DMT came to be known as the God molecule. This is something that a few different people have urged that I go ahead and put out there, seeing as how I'm the person who first started calling 5-MeO-DMT the God molecule back in 2008, but these days, even though that phrase is widely used around the world, it is not generally known that I'm the person who started calling it that, and I've also seen it misattributed to various colleagues of mine, friends of mine, people that I know, people that I don't know, but I was the one who first started using that. So anyway, there's a video on the Entheogenic Evolution YouTube channel that I invite you to check out. And also, speaking of the Entheogenic Evolution YouTube channel, something that I've been playing around with for the past couple of weeks and just wanted to bring to your attention in case you were curious is I have been creating shorts for my YouTube channel. Some of these shorts are just little promos for the podcast episodes that are coming out, but I've also been creating little shorts with animations of my fractal artwork, some of my visionary bird art, and some of my landscape art, as well as bird photographs, landscape photographs, and things like that. Just little slideshows, all put to my original music, and sharing those on my YouTube channel. And, it's kind of fun. So if you haven't been by the Entheogenic Evolution on YouTube, I invite you to swing by. As I've mentioned over recent weeks, I've also created a number of playlists, particularly for podcast episodes. We've got psychedelic healing and retreats. We have psychedelic facilitation and integration. We have psychedelic authors, a whole variety of different topics there that you can find these interviews from the Entheogenic Evolution conveniently and nicely organized for you, the listener. I've also been doing some updating to my personal webpage, martinball.net, so I invite you to check it out if you'd like. And of course, I'm always available for 30, 60, or 90-minute integration calls and consultations with you about your entheogenic experience. I do have my non-dual entheogenic integration webpage, but I'm actually looking to consolidate that into my martinball.net webpage. So I've been transferring some of the data from that webpage over to my personal webpage and getting it ready for consolidation, but it's not quite done yet. But anyway, you can stop by at martinball.net for more information about my integration work, or you can just shoot me an email at martinwball@gmail.com, and we will set up a time to discuss you and your experience. And also just a reminder that we still have enrollment open for the upcoming 5-MeO-DMT facilitator training course with Mindscape Institute. And speaking of website updates and renovations, the mindscapeinstitute.org website has undergone major renovations. It's all been reworked, and so Kirby's been working hard on that end and getting that website all nice and beautiful, and so I invite you to check that out. And yeah, if you're interested in joining the next round of the facilitator training course, I believe it starts the beginning of May, so there's still time. And I'm going to be teaching my 5-MeO-DMT integration specialist training course again in the fall. And more than happy to share information about that class with you, the listener, if you are interested. And it's not too late to start enrolling. It's about 6 months away from now, but if you want to reserve a spot, there's only 15 spaces available. I'm happy to reserve a spot for you. Just reach out and we can talk about it. Okay, those are all the announcements that I have for right now. Let's go ahead and jump into this conversation with Jonathan Robinson. His new book, Ecstasy for Couples, should be available at this point in time. So you're going to learn all about it in this conversation. But if you're interested, go out and get yourself a copy. All right, here is our talk about MDMA and couples therapy. Well, I am welcoming on to the Entheogenic Evolution podcast today author Jonathan Robinson, and I just finished reading his book Ecstasy for Couples a little bit earlier today. How MDMA therapy can create more love and less conflict in your relationship. So, Jonathan, welcome to the show, and I'm excited to talk about this book.
Thanks, Martin. I'm looking forward to this.
So, I would just say, as a reader, I really enjoyed the book because I like books that clearly have their audience in mind and that are grounded and practical and speak right to the audience. And so, in writing this book, you have written it for both therapists and for people who are potentially seeking couples therapy with MDMA. And you've got the different sections spelled out, like if you're a therapist, here's what you need to know. If you're considering this as therapy, here's what you need to know. If you're looking at doing this on your own, here's what you need to know. And I just love how practical and how accessible it is.
Well, thank you. I try to give people really useful information, which is sometimes rare in self-help books.
Yeah. But I think it's done in a very very practical way. I like the acronyms that you have throughout the book that you use in your therapy, and I like, of course, that you are not speaking from a theoretical perspective. You're speaking from a lived perspective of doing this work with couples, and so you're able to provide an insider account of why it works.
Yeah, it's strange. Ecstasy or MDMA became popular in the 70s because a therapist gave it to a lot of other therapists for couples therapy. And, if you've ever done it with a partner, it's just amazing. It's even better if you have a guide. And then, there's never been a book written about how to do MDMA therapy with your partner.
Yeah, well, it's timely. I mean, this is pretty new, is it not? I mean, the date.
Yeah, no, it just came out a month ago.
Yeah, well, fantastic. Have you given any interviews on it yet?
About a dozen.
Oh, okay. So, well, I'm not the first, but that's all right.
But you're the best. You're the best, Martin. So,
oh, thanks. Well, I'll take it. Well, there's so many places we could start, but maybe let's start with you, because I think one of the poignant aspects of the book for me is that you do mention that you had been providing couples therapy for a long time,
yeah,
and found that it doesn't really work.
It's a long, slow slog.
Yeah.
I've done a lot of couples therapy, both with MDMA and without, and I almost don't want to do any without it anymore, just because it's kind of a long, slow process. It's kind of difficult and painful for everybody involved. and yet with MDMA, I can usually heal or enhance a relationship in one day. And everybody's happier. It's a lot easier on everyone. And it's generally about the equivalent of doing 2 years of therapy in a day.
Yeah. And I love that reference. Just, it's practical, it works, you get results. And when we're dealing with healing or transforming, why not use something that works? I mean, that's always been my philosophy on it.
Yeah. And, it's a hard time for couples. We've never done this experiment of let's live together for decades and see if we can keep the love alive. So, resentments and problems accumulate. People don't usually have the training as to how to work through that really quickly and effectively. Trying to solve problems with a person that you're not feeling that great about is really, really difficult. But on MDMA, when you're really emotionally connected and honest and vulnerable, it's actually pretty easy.
Yeah. And that's what allows for real progress to be made. Yeah. Removing those barriers. So in your own practice, what was it that brought you into the idea of actually using MDMA with couples?
Well, I did my master's thesis back in 1984 on the effects of MDMA on trauma. And it was legal then, and then they made it illegal, so I never got my master's thesis published because of that. But I had taken MDMA with my girlfriend at the time, and it kind of was like you're very your audience is very experienced with different medicines. It's a whole new world of vulnerability, of honesty, of open-heartedness. I was like a nerd, and that was like, wow, this is a whole new experience with my girlfriend, and I just really loved it. So I started doing it with her and suggesting it for other people. When I became a therapist, I was doing it in the underground, of course. And over time, have led about 700 journeys. That's over a 40-year period. And there's been 2 or 3 times that my wife and I have hit a wall. We've been together 30 years, where if it weren't for MDMA, we probably wouldn't be married now. And, right now we have a really wonderful, loving relationship. So I owe a lot to MDMA.
Yeah. Let's just back up a moment because I wanted to
Okay.
ask you about this with writing your master's thesis on MDMA and trauma. That was all research that you were doing when it was not a Schedule One illegal substance, but
Right.
then in the time period after completing it and then looking to get published. So for anybody who's in the academic world, you know that when you write your thesis or your dissertation, you want to get it published. That's one of the entryways into, professional academics is you've got to publish and you want to show your research. And then you weren't able to get it published because it had been made illegal. I'm just wanted to ask you, like, how did that feel? Like, to me, that seems like a case for like some real righteous anger and disappointment that you weren't researching anything that was illegal. It's the law that changed,
Yeah.
and then you couldn't even share the information.
Yeah. And, the whole war on drugs and scheduling of things. I mean, marijuana is until recently was a felony. You could get 20 years for smoking a joint. So the laws I saw had nothing to do with any rationality. It was all politics. It's still all politics. It should have gone FDA. Now they've done a lot of studies that have been published. It took Rick Doblin spending 40 years of his life focused on that. It was going to get FDA approval because it's not twice as effective as the next best trauma therapy. It's 35 times more effective. That's not a small difference. That could help millions of people. A lot of veterans who are killing themselves could be, cured in a day or two. And yet, big pharma and other political considerations made it so that the FDA didn't approve it yet. They eventually will, but it takes a lot of science, a lot of money. Really, when big pharma finally comes up with an MDMA derivative that they can patent and make money from, that's when it will get approval. But it's all a lot of politics involved, and I just decided I was going to quietly help people and do it underground, and the results have been great.
Yeah. So maybe let's start there with trauma. And you have a section in the book kind of discussing the different forms of trauma and how that might arise or be treated within a session. But before talking specifically about couples, maybe tell us a little bit about that and why it is so effective in helping people with trauma and these different forms of trauma.
Well, MDMA greatly reduces blood flow to the amygdala, and that's a part of the brain that makes us feel fear and is stimulated when people have had trauma. So when you can, with MDMA, help people feel very relaxed, very much at ease, and then they can go and talk about the trauma, which they've never been able to do like that before. It takes a sting out of it. And then I have some techniques that are really amazing for even taking traumatic memories and images and turning them into like funny cartoons. And once you can laugh at trauma, which may sound weird to people who've been through it, it just takes a sting out of it. And then I also give people techniques to better deal with fear in their life. And there's a lot of methods for doing that. And on MDMA, I can find what is a precise method that's going to work for their brain and their situation. So, it's really an art form and a science, and it's been shown to be incredibly effective. Something that's interesting is the maps, and people are probably familiar with maps that are your audience.
Yeah.
Rick Doblin, who's a great guy, he decided to study this with a protocol that really didn't involve therapy.
Yeah.
It involved the therapist being in the room. If you're having trouble, let me know. But there's not a lot of therapy going down. You're basically listening to music with a blindfold on.
Yeah.
And they did that mostly to get FDA approval because it's the Food and Drug Administration, not the Food, Drug, and Therapy Administration. And in fact, the FDA said one of the reasons we're not approving this is that there was a therapist in the room and we have no idea how to evaluate that. But when you do therapy on MDMA, it's a lot more effective. And so they're getting great results just giving people a pill and having a therapist in the room while people listen to music. They're getting great results. But that's not anywhere near the results you get if you have a therapist that knows how to deal with trauma. So when I do it with people, I use a lot of great methods that work a lot better with MDMA, a lot quicker. And the results are pretty remarkable. I've had people who haven't slept through the night for 40 years. They do one session and they're sleeping like a baby. So it's really moving work to see people move through stuff so quickly. And another factor, which is really interesting, my protocol involves really doing this therapy over Zoom.
Yeah.
And when I told Rick Doblin this, he said, "This works over Zoom?" He'd never even had that thought. And I said, "No, Rick, it doesn't work over Zoom. It works better over Zoom than in person." Because when COVID hit, I couldn't do it in my office anymore. And I thought, well, I'll give it a shot. I don't think it'll work over Zoom. And the results were really good. And then I kept doing it. And I had to kind of reverse engineer. Why is this working better over Zoom than in person? And when I don't really know. If you give me $10 million in 10 years, I'll do a study on that. But it in a way makes sense because a lot of the effective therapy is, can you create a totally safe environment for the client? Well, MDMA does that to a large extent, but Zoom does that to a large extent as well. You put the two together, it's like, chocolate and peanut butter. They just work really well together. And I've never, of the 400 sessions I've done on Zoom, nobody's ever had a problem. And it's a lot more convenient. I can charge people a lot less, and people are just more comfortable in their own house. So it really is going to be the future of MDMA therapy. It just may take a while before people recognize that.
Yeah. So this might be a little bit surprising to people that don't know all the ins and outs of the MAPS study trials and what they actually brought to the government. But as you've emphasized here, that there's no actual therapy involved in the studies that they've been doing with MAPS with the application of MDMA, that largely is, sometimes it gets called like the babysitting routine, where you have your client, they're on the couch, they've got their eye shades on, they're listening to music. It's the exact same protocol that they're using in the psilocybin assisted services here in Oregon, where there is no therapist, there's no therapy involved, and it's all, quote, non-directive. And you're just there as a support. If somebody's like, "Oh, can I hold your hand?" or "I'm feeling nervous," and then you can encourage them. But ultimately it's, put your blindfold back on, put your headphones back on, and go back into your experience. But you're actually describing therapy. And I think that that's a really important point that you make in your book, that you are not just following the MAPS protocol, that you're actually providing therapy. And that it seems that the argument is that you actually get better results when you are doing real therapy with people.
Absolutely. You get better results with real therapy. You get better results doing real therapy with MDMA over Zoom. The results I'm getting are, it's almost remarkable. But it's not because I'm the greatest therapist. I'm a good therapist, but, the MDMA does the heavy lifting. And the Zoom and the safety that is created from those two things put together allows you to really go deep into the psyche and rewire stuff, to heal stuff, to uh, have things that were very fearful no longer be fearful. I also give people methods that they can do after the session that help them to deal with difficult emotions. So it's not just, there's a big integration factor in what I do as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And I like that it wraps it all up in one package. Again, like with the psilocybin assisted services, they offer some integration and support, but again, they're not approaching it as therapists. And so people are going in and having their sessions, but then they might need to then bring those experiences to a therapist who may or may not be familiar with psilocybin or MDMA, and then try and work through those issues with the therapist. But here, you are experienced with MDMA, you're experienced with therapy, you're experienced with working with people directly. And so it just allows for a more productive environment. It seems like it should be like, this is the way we do it, right?
Yeah. Well, it's a way a lot of people are doing it. The medical establishment doesn't really have the experience in doing this, or, it was a big push to get FDA approval, which made it so that the best part of the MDMA therapy could not actually be done, which is pretty funny. And still it was getting great results, because just taking MDMA and listening to music will help your brain, will help you with trauma, but not as much as doing it in the best way possible.
Yeah. So still sticking with the topic of trauma before really moving on to couples. How is it that, so we've got the reduced blood flow to the amygdala, and people are able to talk about and perhaps even laugh about their experiences. So what then is the role of the therapist? As you've hinted at a little bit of this within that session, how do you guide somebody through that? And, MDMA lasts for about maybe 4 or 5 hours. So what's the trajectory of getting people into that place where they feel comfortable? And that's obviously, it's a big part of any kind of trauma therapy, that everybody's warned that even talking about your trauma can be re-traumatizing because it's so difficult for people. So through this reduction in the blood flow to that part of the brain that increases anxiety, they're more open. But then how are you properly directing them? And still over Zoom, for people who have a hard time wrapping their mind around that, how does it function for people?
Well, just like we're doing this over Zoom, you got to get rapport. You got to feel like, you feel good with that person. Actually, Zoom can reduce distractions. If you were here, there'd be more distractions. So it's actually really good for going, really a deep conversation. So I ask questions. Once they feel safe, the MDMA's there, they feel good about our connection. I say, so, tell me about what happened the night of the whatever. And they start talking about, like they're talking about the weather mostly. And I ask for details. And I say, questions like, what was the hardest part about this? Sometimes I use some methods that are really very effective. If something still bothers them, I say, picture that person with a bozo nose on their face or Mickey Mouse ears. And, once they've done that, it's kind of like if I say to you, don't think of a pink elephant, Martin, that's the first thing you think of. So don't think of that person with a bozo nose and Mickey Mouse ears. Soon they're laughing at this person that used to terrorize them. And there's various other techniques I use, making sure that they always feel really safe. I have them calibrate how safe they feel on a 1 to 10 scale. And I never want them to not feel safe. If they start to feel a little unsafe, we do certain guided meditations that help them to feel more relaxed. And soon they're talking about the trauma like they're talking about going to a rock concert. They actually like going over it. This is interesting. It's not bothering me anymore. And then we talk about how if difficult feelings arise after the MDMA, what precise techniques they can use in a minute or two to reduce the intensity of those feelings very, very quickly.
Yeah. So what would some of those be?
Well, for example, I'll give an example to your audience and you right now. Most people have a pet or a person that they have great affection for. So we'll just do this over 90 seconds now. If you can think of especially pets are good, dogs or cats. If there's a pet or a person that you have great affection for, you might just close your eyes for a moment and imagine or remember special times with that being, times where you were really having a good time together. And now imagine, if it's appropriate, hugging or holding that being and really feel that heart connection to them. And think of how grateful you are that you have that connection in your life. And you might imagine telling them how much they mean to you and seeing how happy that makes them. And just feel that warm sense of love and affection and connection. And imagine that you are able to send them like a blessing about how much they mean to you, and that really impacts them as their care impacts you. And as you breathe into that feeling, just know that you can access that feeling whenever you want. So that's a very simple guided meditation. Yeah. On MDMA, people are often in tears of love and gratitude in a short period of time. But with practice, you get better at that. There's also somatic things I do that help people to deal with fear in a way that calms it down very quickly. I'm kind of a technique junkie, Marty. So hopefully it's okay. I could call you Marty. I should call you Martin. But anyways, I like to find the right method for a person that works for them very effectively and efficiently.
So that actually is a question I wanted to ask about, specifically when dealing with trauma. So this is just a curiosity. Some psychedelic medicines, when trauma is processed or encountered, it often is a very somatic experience. So I think you know that I mostly work in the 5-MeO world, which can be very, very somatic, and often it presents somatically where there is no conscious agency on the part of the client. So this is something that happens at a sort of a spontaneous level. And this is one of the reasons why we wouldn't, like, every once in a while I get people asking me, like, could we do a 5-MeO session over Zoom? And I was like, absolutely not.
Yeah, absolutely not. Yeah.
No way. Absolutely not.
I would never do that.
And that's primarily one of the reasons why, is that there's a big somatic physical component of it. Or then if we look at like ayahuasca, where purging is very common, or diarrhea, there's a lot of stuff that's going on there. But it's not so much the case with MDMA. But are there any somatic components that then arise within someone's session, but then can be managed over Zoom, that they're in their own private home? I'm curious about those kinds of elements.
Yeah, it happens on occasion where I have people like stand up and shake their body out. When we're fearful or moving through fear, shaking can be good, and I can supervise that. Sometimes people want to stretch. There are things that can arise. Sometimes people feel like they want to make sounds, and I encourage them to do that. But it's all very controlled. I've never had an out of control person on MDMA, and now I've done 700 sessions, so it could happen, but it's less than 1/10 of 1%, evidently, since it hasn't happened. There are people who sometimes purge on MDMA, about 1%, and we just handle that. Get a bucket, and then they're fine. But unlike psilocybin, 5-MeO, it's not as somatic a thing as those chemicals or those medicines.
Yeah. So it sounds like it's fairly manageable with what does arise. And of course, people don't lose agency on MDMA, that you're always able to have a conversation with them. They're always able to respond.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, they're not necessarily going to be zooming off into the universe and like, oh, where'd they go?
Yeah. Well, to share a funny story, which I have in the book, for people who haven't taken MDMA, my parents were always curious,
Oh,
why are you dealing with this illegal medicine?
yeah.
And I said, well, it's really magical. And they said, what's it do? And I said, well, the only way you really know is you try it and then you see what it does. And they were conservative, but they said, okay, we'll try it. We were close. So I gave them the medicine, told them how to take it, proper set and setting. A year later, I asked them if they'd taken it, and they said, yeah, we took it. And I said, well, what happened? And they said, well, we waited like 20 minutes and nothing happened. So I guess it didn't work. Well, it usually takes about 45 minutes for MDMA to impact people. So I said, well, what'd you do after the 20 minutes? And their eyes lit up and they said, well, we had nothing planned that night. So we ended up sitting on the couch and we talked about how much we love each other and how grateful we were for you kids. And we'd had some arguments the prior week and we worked all that out because we had nothing planned. We just, had the whole evening to talk together and then we cuddled. It ended up being the best night of our entire marriage. The only disappointment was that the drug never took effect. I'm laughing the whole time. To this, on their dying day, they were clear that the drug never took effect, although they did have the most unique night of their marriage.
Yeah. I really like that story in the book. And I think it encapsulates in a really beautiful way how this approach with MDMA can be profoundly connecting and therapeutic, but not necessarily what people think of in terms of a psychedelic experience or preconditions that they might have about what they think it should do or should not do. But yeah, they had the best night cuddling in their entire marriage and just having a great conversation and felt connected to each other. And so that's the magic right there.
Yeah, that's what we need. We don't necessarily, I mean, I love 5-MeO. I love psilocybin. They have different, every medicine has different uses. But in this world of great polarization and separation, we really need some help in connecting with each other in a vulnerable, honest, intimate way. And that's why I think it's really the best medicine for this age and what we need now more than ever.
Yeah. And I'm sure you've encountered this, but it's a bit ironic that, like in California, there's quite a few different municipalities that have passed legalized nature propositions, right? We're saying, we're going to legalize mushrooms and iboga and peyote and anything that comes from nature. But if it was made in a lab, no, we're not interested. And so MDMA has kind of been lumped in there for some people in the psychedelic world, that it actually classifies as bad because it's, quote, man-made or it's artificial or synthetic. And so it gets left out of the conversation.
Yeah. And, it's a shame that wasn't FDA approved in 2024. It probably will be soon, just because there's a lot of, a lot of my clients are veterans and cops.
Yeah.
People worry, are you worried about, being arrested? Well, I said, if they arrest me, I'll bring down the LA Police Department.
Yeah.
Because I've worked with a lot of them. So it will take some time for it to for people to realize that it's not really a worry when it comes to legal or illegal. Nobody's focused on that because even the cops realize this is a therapy. And yeah, it's not natural, but then again, things that are natural like arsenic and hemlock aren't so good either.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, well, I love that you do work with police officers and cops. It just reminds me of an interview that I gave with this guy at a radio show in Canada a number of years ago now. And I think this was maybe 2015 or something like that. And he had me on as a guest because he wanted to have an adversarial conversation. I didn't know that prior to agreeing to the interview.
Yeah.
And so I was telling him about, well, yeah, like these various compounds that they allow for processing of trauma, for PTSD. A lot of people in the military or in the police are actually using these to overcome things that they've experienced through their work or through their life experience. And this guy said, well, I'm a former cop and I think they should just suck it up. And then he cut off my mic, and that was the end of the interview.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah. So I'm glad that you're working with people, on the inside of that trajectory so that they can have an intimate understanding of why this actually is valuable and why we don't want to be rounding up people and, throwing them in prison for really providing an important service that's healing and transformative for people.
Yeah. Yeah. And in a way, it's a shame that it's lumped with all the other drugs because it really, more than any other drug, it's a therapy accelerator, whether you're dealing with trauma or trying to connect with your partner or just trying to overcome anxiety or depression.
Yeah. So let's turn now to connecting with your partner.
Okay.
Then couples therapy. And maybe let's just start, if you could tell us a little bit about what is standard couples therapy outside of work with MDMA? Like what goes on in a therapy session? And also, why is it so slow?
Well, first of all, it's slow because by the time couples go to a therapist, they've usually been having trouble for about 6 years.
Yeah.
If you got cancer and then waited 6 years before you saw your doctor, the outlook wouldn't be good. So I don't get many couples who go, hey, we're doing pretty well. We understand each other well. Let's just work on the last 5%. I get couples who are screaming at each other a lot, sitting. It's hard to get them in the same room because they just don't like each other. That's not all the couples I work with, but that's not uncommon. And working out problems with somebody that you don't trust, there's been an infidelity or whatever, and you don't like, it's really, really challenging. It takes a long time to build that trust, months often, to stop the blame and the whole thing. On MDMA, that takes about 20 minutes.
Yeah. So
I make a lot more money working with couples not on MDMA, but I tell them, one, I don't need the money, and two, it's a long, slow slog. If you want to actually heal or enhance your relationship quickly, this is another way to do it. But what I do is really a lot of helping people with their communication.
Mm-hmm.
Most couples, what they've learned is shaming, complaining, blaming, and explaining. None of those work. When was last? Are you married, Martin?
Yes, I am.
Okay. When was the last time you told your wife all the things that she's doing wrong, and she said, "Oh my gosh, you're right. I've been wrong all this time. Thank you for telling me the errors of my ways."
Yeah, never.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Yeah, doesn't work.
So that's what people do in relationships that are having trouble. So I have to tell them how to communicate in a way that fosters vulnerability, intimacy, and no one being right or wrong, just working through issues so that you can come up with solutions that work.
Yeah. So those barriers to communication, they're hard to break down.
Well, it always comes. The major barrier is blaming.
Yeah.
And people don't really even know what communicating without blame would look like. So it's, first, it's a little bit like learning a new language. Once they learn that language, they find that there's a lot more love and care and a lot less anger and resentment. But, there a lot of couples have dealt with a pile of hurts or one big tear in the relationship, like infidelity. So you have to repair trust, broken trust. And that's a process that is a science. And I take people through that science. It's a lot quicker on MDMA than trying to do it weekly. And then I'm really also teaching people certain new skills so that once they're off the MDMA, they can rely on those skills to avoid arguments. Let me give like a really simple example.
Yeah.
Uh, uh, when people are starting to have a disagreement, um, people don't go from 0 to 100 where they're fine and then they have a shouting match. It usually builds up. So I have an agreement couples make where they can either partner can say, uh, let's take 2 minutes timeout. And during that 2 minutes, don't talk. Now, when couples do this, when things are starting to get tense, what it does, it interrupts that momentum,
Mm-hmm.
and immediately that one technique can eliminate 80% of arguments. So I have a lot of very simple methods that help people avoid arguments, solve problems, connect emotionally. And, it's strange to me that a large part of our happiness comes from our intimate relationships. And yet people generally don't invest in them, and they don't get training for them. If you want to fly a plane, you got to train for that.
Yeah.
Well, relationships are just as complicated as flying a plane, and most people have not had even half an hour of training in how to do that successfully.
Yeah. And I think for a lot of people, maybe the assumption would be, well, learning to fly a plane, like that's something special and different, but people have been couples forever. So like this is just ingrained in our biology. But as you point out in the book that, people live longer now than they used to. And also that a lot of marriages were done for financial reasons or for security reasons. Whereas in the modern age, people do, at least in theory, they get married or they enter into long-term partnership because they want a mutually supportive, loving, fulfilling relationship. So that actually the reasons why people marry or commit to a relationship, those have shifted and changed, but we don't have a long history of how to do that successfully. And as you say, we have no training around it. And so then people are often they're left feeling like there's something wrong with them. And of course, we've got a media ecosystem that fills us with all kinds of really warped notions of romantic love and fulfillment, and you are my everything, and I'm so lost without you. None of that is really healthy either. So the cards are stacked against us in a sense.
Very stacked against us. And, it's really only been the last 80 years that people expected their partner to be their everything. Before that, historically, you were dead by 25. So you weren't dealing with long-term relationships. And also, even when you were married for a while, you were off hunting 80% of the time as a guy. And you didn't really spend much time with your so-called partner. So we're in a very new situation, and we don't have the skills to handle it well. So most couples are kind of held together by Netflix and TV.
So with training in mind, people can come into an MDMA couples therapy session, and because this is not the babysitting model, this is not just, okay, lie there quietly on the couch, but you're actually interacting with them over Zoom, asking questions, prompting activities and insights. Yeah, what's the trajectory for that? And of course, we should probably say that there's an introduction, right, that you have. You meet with them before actually doing the day of the session, and then there's integration afterwards. So maybe just walk us through what the trajectory is for something like that.
Sure. Well, so I meet somebody for an hour where I'm learning about their relationship and they're learning about me to see if they want to do this type of therapy. And if they do, then we set a time for a 5-hour session. I make sure they have a way of getting pure medicine, which I've been able to work out. And so we go into it. They take the medicine. We're on Zoom, and I go deeply into what's their problems, look at their communication patterns. I wrote a book 30 years ago called Communication Miracles for Couples that Oprah said was the best couples book ever written. So, it has a lot of good stuff in it, which is how I got into doing so much couples therapy in the first place. And so I do a lot of techniques from that book. And it's really almost like, surgery where we can really, go deeply in there and fix a lot of the misunderstandings. A lot of couples really don't understand each other very well. Whereas on MDMA, that's really easy. I never have couples come into my office and say, we understand each other really well. That's why we want a divorce.
Yeah.
But the opposite happens all the time. So I help with understanding. We work through specific issues. Every couple has issues with money and sex and parenting. And, we work through those. We come to some agreements how to handle those things. Then a week later, we do an integration session, at least one, where we go over what happened in the session, what's been happening since then. We go over the agreements, how to handle certain problems. On occasion, sometimes it takes more than one integration session, but it's a complete package and it seems to work really well. So it's like a retraining on how to get over some of the hurts of the past and move forward in a loving way. And while we're on the subject of training, I just want to mention before the podcast, we had talked about how I had trained 500 people to do my protocol. Because I was getting such good results, people wanted to know, how can I do this? And so I created a training and it was very popular. If people want to learn about that, they can go to mdmatraining.net. But we're also offering to your listeners $200 off the normal price. If they want to, they can look at that. And if they use the coupon code BALL200, they'll get $200 off the normal price. It's a totally online training with occasional live supervision. And I'm really proud of the training because I want to get this out to as many people doing this type of therapy. I think it's, marital therapy generally is not that effective. So it's good that we need a better technology.
Yeah, I'm really impressed by all the stories that you share within the book. And I'm glad that you're offering this kind of training because I have felt that the standard protocol, the non-intervention protocol that has been largely promoted in the psychedelic world of how we conduct psychedelic sessions, it just feels really lacking to me. That I think that there's a lot of room for exactly what you're proposing within this book and what you've been enacting within your sessions with your clients and then also training people on. So I think it's a great resource. And also I would want to point out that you do mention in the book that if somebody is looking for this kind of therapy, they can reach out to you. You can also give references. And I think that that's great because I have found myself when sometimes I end up working with couples, and I suggest to them, like, I think you guys could probably use a session with MDMA. And then they ask, well, then do you know any therapists who are providing that? And my answer is like, no, like they're all underground. I don't know how to find them. I don't know where they are, but good luck. And that's my strong suggestion for you guys, just based on everything you shared, that I really think it could be very powerful for you. So I just think it's a great resource. And to know that you're training other people in this and can give references, I just think is very, very important. And also, just in case anybody didn't pick up on this, that you mentioned that the way that you work with clients is that you have them get the MDMA. You are not a provider. You are not like supplying anybody with MDMA. They get their own. They bring it to their session. They take it in their home. You are in your home over Zoom or in your office, wherever you may be. So you are not someone who's distributing MDMA to anyone.
Correct. One of the ways I've been able to be so out there with this and not worry is that I actually don't do anything illegal.
Yeah.
I found a way to sidestep all that. So doing it on Zoom, I can talk to anybody on Zoom. The fact that they're on MDMA is their business. Now, I do want to make sure that they have access to pure medicine. So I let them know how they can do that through an app known as Signal. And Signal is encrypted, so law enforcement can't get to it. But I tell them about a place on Signal where they can get their medicine, and that is 100% reliable and good medicine, because the biggest problem with MDMA is when people take impure medicine.
Yeah. So why don't we emphasize that for a moment, that a lot of what is sold out on the street as Molly or Ecstasy is not pure MDMA. It's often laced with fentanyl or might have no MDMA in it whatsoever. And that it is very important that if people want to do this kind of therapy, that they make sure that they're testing it, right? There's dancesafe.org. You can get your testing kits and you can make sure that it's the real deal and that it's pure and that it's not combined with anything else. And that's where the health studies that have been done of MDMA, they're like, oh, this has caused brain damage or whatever. Like, that's not with MDMA.
Actually, they did an interesting thing. Rick Doblin hired a scientist to do these studies, and the scientists they hired gave baboons and squirrel monkeys what he said was MDMA. It ends up this scientist was hired by the government as well to try to make MDMA sound as dangerous as possible. So he kind of was a double agent that way. And I have this story in the book Ecstasy as Medicine, where a couple of these animals died. And then there was a big article in Science magazine about how MDMA is dangerous and does brain damage and all this. Well, it ends up he hadn't given them MDMA, he'd given them a massive dose of methamphetamine.
Yeah.
And so there was a whole scandal about this. But MDMA has been shown in a lot of studies to be actually very, very easy on the brain and body, as long as you're not doing it very often. And then for the people who are real addicts who try to do it very often, there's a great thing that it stops working.
Yeah.
So it's not addictive for a couple reasons. One is it tends not to be an addictive drug, but even if you do take it very often, you'll find that it doesn't work. So in that way, there aren't so much MDMA addicts.
Yeah. So medically speaking, it's relatively benign. It's relatively safe. We don't really have a lot of medical concerns. I mean, of course, you do cover in the book, there are various contraindications that, any potential client, needs to go through those and make sure that you don't have any of those checked off.
And one of them is not uncommon, so I'll mention that MDMA and SSRIs or antidepressants don't mix well. And it's not that they're particularly dangerous, but they just cancel each other out. So if you're on antidepressants and you take MDMA, you'll likely notice no effect.
Yeah.
So that's the biggest contraindication. But, if people have extremely high blood pressure, that can be a problem. There's other things in the book that I talk about that are pretty rare.
Yeah. And I think it's important to note about the SSRIs that, I've been doing this a long time on the podcast. So back in the early days, it was always like, you can't take SSRIs with any kind of psychedelic, that it's dangerous, that this is potentially deadly. And now the scientific consensus is that it's probably just going to deaden or dampen the experience. So it just might be a dud, which, if you're going in for therapy, that would be very disappointing.
Yeah.
But it's not dangerous. It's not going to, no one's going to die because of this. So it's not like, it's not a medical issue in that sense. It's just more of, it's dampening the effectiveness of the medicine, and therefore your therapeutic session it's not going to be what you were hoping it would be.
Yeah. Yeah. If you read on the internet, there's all kinds of warnings of this thing called serotonin syndrome. I've asked a lot of people in the field if they've ever encountered it. Nobody has ever encountered it.
Yeah, I know, but everybody's worried about it.
Everybody's worried about it. Yeah. And, You don't want a dead session. So when people are on SSRIs, I have them work with their doctor to slowly taper before we do a session.
Yeah. So then with couples in their Zoom session, this comes up a couple different times in the book, that one of the powers of doing it via Zoom is that, well, they might get a little bit more than cuddly. And so then there's the potential just to turn Zoom off, which of course, if you were in your therapist's office, then I guess you could ask the therapist to leave the room for a little while, but that would be a little awkward. That might kill the mood.
Yeah, yeah.
So
yeah. I mean, it happened. Not that often. People really love these sessions. People often ask, "Well, 5 hours therapy, that sounds torturous." Well, it's harder on me because I'm not on MDMA.
yeah.
But people seem to have zero problem whatsoever talking for 5 hours on Zoom while on MDMA. And although they may feel romantic with each other, maybe 1 in 20 have said, "Hey, we'd like to spend an hour without you here." And I say, "Yeah, okay, I'll check back in an hour." And they turn off their video, or we go back online an hour later, and usually they have big smiles on their face. Now, that being said, it's very hard to reach orgasm on MDMA. So it's more of a sensual, intimate experience more than a sexual experience.
Yeah, which even that could be really potently powerful for couples. Like, as you mentioned in your book, that often when you get couples that are having difficulties, as you say, people they go to therapy when it's been bad for a long time. And so maybe it's been months or even years since they've had any kind of sexual or intimate contact with each other. And, with many things with couples, that things cascade, right? And that the little issues aren't really about the little issues. And so, especially if there's like a sexual dysfunction, that's just going to snowball into a cascade of feelings of blame and rejection and disappointment. And so then, with the potential of like, well, maybe there's going to be no orgasms taking place here, that actually can remove the pressure of performance and then allow people that opportunity of, we're just enjoying close physical contact, which maybe they haven't had in a long time, but it so changes the playing field that it allows for a different orientation around what the quote sexual experience might be.
Yeah, and that can be healing in of itself. A lot of men go, "Wow, that was a great experience." They're not used to that experience, so that can be a real learning experience as well. Another point which is interesting, I mentioned this in the Ecstasy for Couples book, is about 10 years ago, my wife was we hit a problem in our marriage, and if it weren't for MDMA, I'm not sure we'd be married. She was just mad at me all the time for like how I walked and how I closed the refrigerator. This was not her normal. This like came on suddenly, where she was just livid at me all the time, and we didn't know what was going on. It went on for like 3 months, and both of us didn't know what was going on. So we hired the best therapist I knew to live with us for 3 days, hoping that he would figure it out, because the alternative was like divorce. I can't live with somebody who hates me all the time. Is angry. So after 2 days, he said, "I have no idea what's going on. She's just livid at you and for no reason." So he suggested that we take MDMA, which we did. And what came out was that her aunt had died 3 months earlier. And she was close to his aunt, but she had not taken the time to visit her during her dying day. And she was incredibly angry at herself for not doing that. And when she realized this, she just was, very mad at her. And then she cried for like an hour while I held her. And all of that pent up energy was released. And after our session, all her anger at me was gone. So she had displaced her anger at herself on me. None of us knew this was what was going on. And my point being is that sometimes on MDMA, you really get to the bottom of what's
Yeah.
causing an obstacle in the relationship. And, we could have gone to therapy for 2 years, exploring how I closed the refrigerator door too loudly. That wouldn't have gone anywhere. So MDMA sometimes can really get to the bottom of the issue that's causing problems in a relationship, whereas it might have taken a long time otherwise to come to that conclusion.
Yeah. And thank you for sharing that story because I think it illustrates kind of a deep truth of relationships where it becomes easier to take out whatever inner dynamic we might be struggling with. We take it out on our partner and we do it either consciously or subconsciously, but it's not really about whatever the activity is. Like, as you say, it's not about how you walk or how you close the refrigerator. There's something else going on. But then you, as a recipient of that, you're going to start to feel like, well, is there something wrong with me? Or you're going to build up resentment. And then, so then you get angry and then she gets angry and things just cascade. And it can be so hard to dissolve that tension for people to come to a deeper understanding within themselves. I mean, short of couples therapy, this is where you hear people say, well, then I went on a trip to Costa Rica and I went and I drank ayahuasca for a week. And then I finally realized like, oh yeah, it was the issue with my aunt or whatever it was. And then they go back and maybe they're happier. But this is a more direct approach of actually working with the couple to help with these kinds of things. And I just think that it's so common to have these kinds of dynamics develop within relationships. And so to have this in your toolkit of like, well, let's take some ecstasy together. And for those, who are listening and did mention that you have a section in the book, like if you want to do it on your own, like here's how you can do it. But I do want to promote, I think it's important that I think it is more effective if you're working with a skilled therapist or facilitator who can help direct you along the way. Because, it's easy to get lost. Or like the example I just gave of somebody going to Costa Rica and drinking ayahuasca on 4 nights. That's different than having someone with you working through your issues and engaging in dialogue in that moment so that hopefully that resolution that brings about happiness that arrives more quickly. And it's less of a, drink ayahuasca 4 times and, we're rolling the roulette table and hope that it deals with this issue somewhere along the way.
Yeah, no, well said. And yeah, it's just a much more direct approach. And luckily more fun.
Yeah.
And with the Zoom approach, a lot more convenient. As I said, it's nice to do it in the privacy of your own home. You're comfortable. You don't have to think about getting on a plane or a train or an automobile afterwards.
Yeah.
It's just a lot more convenient for everybody. And also, I get to charge a lot less. If there is FDA approval, the clinics are thinking of charging $15,000. Me and the people I train charge less than 1/10 of that. So it's just much more. It's a lot less than going to a therapist for a few months.
Yeah. Yeah, it just reminds me of a conversation with a client I had the other day who was asking, like, he says he really wants to try 5-MeO. And so I recommended a couple places where it is legal, where you can do that. And he's like, that is so far out of my price range.
Yeah.
It's like, well, unfortunately, I mean, that's the way that it is. So the price becomes a barrier for people that are looking for these experiences. And going back to what you're saying about being in the home, I think that that's a big part of helping people feel very comfortable, and like they're in their safe space, they're in their home, so that they can be more relaxed, and that they don't have to travel. I think that all of those are just very important advantages. A word that you mentioned that I'd like to go back to is fun, and I always like it when I hear that in the context of discussion of psychedelic experiences, because one of the things I'm a little critical of in the psychedelic world is when it becomes everything's got to be super sacred. And if it's super sacred, then it's super serious. We've got to be really serious about it. And it overlooks the fact that psychedelics can be fun. MDMA can be a lot of fun. And even, dare we say, couples therapy can actually be fun.
Yeah, they should call this stuff ecstasy or something.
Yeah. Give it a good name. Give it a
Give
really
it a
good
good name.
descriptive
Yeah,
name.
yeah.
Yeah. Um, how often do you feel that fun is an element that enters into these therapy sessions with couples?
Well, I think different people have different gifts in how they approach therapy. And I like fun and I like humor a lot. I've done a little bit of stand-up humor. And so I find that humor and fun are incredibly healing. So, besides the fact that I like it, if I can heal people by them laughing at some issue. I mean, who has been married for 10 years or more who has no issues with sexuality or money? Everybody,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
100%. So, it's not so personal, just, laughing at how people get upset and getting them to be lighter about it actually is part of the therapy where if you can laugh at something, it's no longer going to cause the difficulty that once did.
Hmm.
Once somebody sees their nemesis with the bozo nose and
Yeah.
and Mickey Mouse ears, they can never quite get to that place of terror that they did before. And I use various humorous techniques and fun techniques as part of the healing process.
Yeah. And I'm sure that that must be quite enjoyable for you when you get to witness couples who maybe they come in and it's like we hate each other, we can't stand each other, and just we're shooting daggers at each other through our eyes, and then have those moments of levity and fun and those breakthroughs where suddenly they can see the other person's perspective or they can let go of the story that they've been holding on to. That must be gratifying. It must feel good as a therapist.
Oh, it's the whole therapy is very moving. Sometimes I end up in tears with them.
Yeah.
It's very when people go from separation and anger and resentment to love. I can't think of a better way to spend an afternoon. So it's really there is a lot of skill involved in navigating some of these things, but it's a very moving experience for me as well.
Yeah. Well, it sounds like you enjoy your work then.
I do.
Yeah.
Feel very lucky.
Yeah. How many couples do you work with, like, say, over the course of a year? Like, what is your schedule like?
Well, it changes depending on the season. Right now, I actually, at one time, I had like a year waiting list, which is why I developed a referral list of people that I knew and trusted and were good. I still have that referral list, but now I only have a month waiting list, which I prefer because it feels funny to meet with somebody and say, yeah, well, I'll see you next year,
Yeah. Yeah. Good luck over the next year. Hope you guys don't kill each other. But
Yeah,
if you haven't,
right.
we've got a session lined up. Yeah.
So, usually it's about a month waiting list at this point. And some people want sooner, so I give them referrals to people who I trust. Uh, and what was your original question? I'm starting to go off on that, but what was your original question?
Oh, I just asked like how many people you see over the course of a year. Like how busy does it keep you?
Well, I do about 2 sessions a week, so that might be 100 couples in a year.
Yeah.
Um, and it's very gratifying work.
Yeah. I'm always interested in any uh, changes that you might have experienced in terms of demographics, in terms of like who's coming for this kind of work or where are they coming from? Is there anything that you've noticed over the years that you've been doing this that is interesting to you?
Well, something that's interesting is I also have a podcast called Awareness Explorers, which I mostly interview spiritual leaders. People like Marianne Williamson, Deepak Chopra, Adyashanti, those types of people. And it might be because of that a lot of people come to me for MDMA therapy for helping with spiritual progression. Which is, MDMA isn't really known for that, but it's really good for helping people open their heart
Oh, yeah.
and have more love in their life. And there are blocks to that. So I've noticed that in the last 2 or 3 years. Of course, trauma work, couples work, but people who feel like they're not making much progress in their therapy for anxiety and depression. That's also a thing. So I get a wide variety, which I appreciate.
Yeah. I'm curious if you're also seeing people who are coming in saying that they have no prior relationship with any psychedelic medicines, but they're now curious about this kind of therapy because maybe they heard about it, or maybe they read Michael Pollan's book or something like
Yeah,
that.
yeah,
And I just
right.
ask because I've definitely seen a lot of that in the 5-MeO world with people saying, often people who are in mid or later life,
Uh-huh.
saying that, yeah, I'm curious about this because now I've heard about it, and now I feel that there's like a certain level of acceptance within culture that maybe wasn't there before. So whereas I never would have thought of this before, but now I am.
Yeah, well, yeah, just as you're saying, Martin, that maybe 15% of people fit into that category. I've never tried anything, but I read your book. I get
Yeah,
that a lot. And it
yeah,
sounds like, wow, that sounds pretty, it's not like 5-MeO is great, but it's you want to make sure that you're going slowly before you get shot out of that cannon. Whereas MDMA is just very gentle. So I think it's a good medicine for people who are introducing themselves to new medicines.
yeah. I think MDMA. My personal opinion is that it's very user friendly. You do mention in the book that some people, a small percentage of people, feel nauseous or a certain level of discomfort, particularly during the come on. What percentage is that you mentioned? Do you
I'd say
remember?
30% have about a 10-minute window where they feel discombobulated, and they might use the word a little nauseous. Hardly anybody purges. That's very rare. But I tell them, and it's like clockwork because, I've done this with 700 people. I can say if they're starting to feel that, well, you have 8 minutes left before you'll
Yeah.
start to feel really good, and 8 minutes later they go, yeah, I don't feel that anymore. I feel really good. So it's usually not a problem, especially because I can anticipate it and let them know that it's very temporary.
Yeah. So maybe this is just a completely irrelevant question because it would be self-selecting. But I do know that there's a proportion of people out there in the world that they almost get a certain set of pride of I'm going to learn and grow through suffering. And so the harder it is, the better. Because that's what really makes me grow. But here you're offering me this drug that's going to make me feel good. How can I possibly grow if I'm feeling good? Like shouldn't growth be hard work and suffering? Do you ever encounter that, or is it just self-selecting for people who come from MDMA therapy?
No, I do encounter that. And I should say that, it's not all fun and games, these sessions. We go into some challenging material, and sometimes there are definitely people have challenging moments during it. We mix it up. 5 hours is a long time. You can have some fun, you can have some challenge, you can have some tears, you can have some joy, but it's not all rainbows the whole time. So even the people who have that disposition, they like, I want to go dig in, to the
Yeah.
worst thing my parents ever said. And okay, I'll go there. I'm here to help you. So they can get that fulfilled usually.
Yeah. So maybe this question would be too broad then, but how can you support people over Zoom when they're going through something that's particularly difficult or challenging? Like, what is the role of the therapist at that point?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's very specific to the client and what they're going through. I do like to keep people in a window of tolerance. So, if on a 1 to 10 scale, 10 is excruciatingly difficult and 1 is not light and breezy, I find that once you get over like a 7 in that category, where people are dealing with just extreme emotions of difficulty, that you're losing the therapy. They're just so if they start to get into that realm, I have ways to ground them, to help them feel safe, so that they're in a 5, 6, 7 level that is more conducive to exploration and therapy rather than feeling overwhelmed and out of control, which is what we're actually trying to avoid.
Right. So that's also just a plug for working with a skilled therapist, because of course,
Yeah.
if people are trying to do this on their own, they, even though ecstasy, yeah, MDMA, you're going to feel good most likely. If you are looking to confront the dark or difficult stuff, that you might have one of these overwhelms, and that's where having somebody who is a neutral guide, who's like, if it's couples doing it on their own at home, they might like spiral down into a cascade,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so having that neutral party that can help steer the ship, I think, is very important.
Yeah. You said that well.
Yeah. Okay. Well, then we'll leave it there. Um, I have a little bit more that I'd like to ask you about
Yeah.
before I let you go. I'd like to return to the class that you've created. I'm curious how you went about developing the class and kind of even determining where you're going to start. You said, I think it's like 48 hours worth of materials. So how did you
Yeah.
construct the class and determine the coursework and the lectures, or all of that?
It happened somewhat magically. I did a trial class with like 15 people,
Mm-hmm.
to see how it would go. And I had the outline, just like you're writing a book. And the first class was just 15 hours. And then I got feedback on what people needed. In the class now, there's a lot of stuff about marketing, because I want to get the protocol out, and people want to make money doing this.
Yeah.
So I have probably 10 hours on just how to market yourself really effectively, which applies to, being an MDMA therapist or whatever thing you're doing. People don't know that information, and that's really important if you want to help people. We also got some of the world's leading doctors to talk about different aspects of safety and, contraindications. So I added that. I added stuff from people at Dance Safe who could talk about how to test your medicine and all kinds of things. So it partly happened organically as I got feedback from people like, what would you like to know more information about?
Yeah.
So now close to 50 hours of material. It's self-paced because it's all online. And I'm very proud of the training because it's very thorough. It has an average rating of 4.8 out of 5 from the 500 people who've taken it. And I think it gives people everything that they need. A lot of these other trainings out there aren't practically based. Like, what's the intake form? How much do you charge? What can you say on your website? How do you market yourself? All these very practical considerations. Plus, of course, I give people a lot of therapeutic techniques, which they could use on themselves, but also, work with individuals and couples. So it's a very thorough training that way. And luckily, I'm in a position where I sold a lot of books thanks to Oprah. So I don't particularly need the money. A lot of these trainings are like ridiculously expensive. Mine's about $1,000, but your people can get $200 off that by using the coupon code BALL200.
Yeah. Ball 200.
And it's if people want to, do either MDMA type of therapy or other psychedelic therapies, I think it's very thorough and practical, as opposed to being more theoretical or, not giving people the exact information they need.
Yeah. Well, I think if your book is any indication of what the content of the class is, I'm sure it is excellent. And so, again, I would recommend to anybody listening to this conversation that is curious, the book we've been talking about is Ecstasy for Couples, How MDMA Therapy Can Create More Love and Less Conflict in Relationship. And I really want to emphasize it's very reader friendly. It's very practical. It's very applicable. And it's just step-by-step instructions and things to keep in mind and remember, and exercises and practices. So I just think it's very, very useful for this realm of therapy.
You should be my PR person, Martin. You're good at that. And we don't even have a deal that way. But thank you. I appreciate all the nice comments.
Yeah, well, I'm one of these interviewers who likes to read the books of their guests. I've been a guest on many different shows where, the person has flat out told me like, "Oh, I haven't read any of your books," and like, "Oh, okay." I mean, I'll talk for hours anyway, so it doesn't really matter. But I like to read people's books, and when I actually genuinely like it, I like to be able to say
Yeah.
that, and I really do.
It makes the interviews go better because you know what you're talking about now.
Yeah. Where's the website for people to find you or find the class?
Yeah. Well, for the class, they can go to mdmatraining.net. And for all things related to the book, or also at my website, which is XTC for couples, XTC for couples .net. If they put in their email address, they get a bunch of stuff, including the 12 questions that lead to instant intimacy and 10 ways to avoid bad psychedelic trips. So
useful information.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, Jonathan, is there anything that I haven't asked you about that you want to make sure we cover before I let you go for today?
Well, just to end that, one of the things I was been interested in my life is people who have near-death experiences. And I had a near-death experience many years ago. And what's interesting for the people who remember those experiences, they all agree that they felt like they were encountering or realizing that love is the reason we're here.
Yeah.
That's like numero uno mission in life. Yeah. Learn to be a loving human being. And whatever your religious or spiritual philosophy is, we all know that love is probably the most important thing in our lives. And yet there's no trainings on that. There's a whole culture or culture that is really creating a lot of obstacles to that.
Yeah.
So I think of MDMA as a sacred technology given to us by the divine to help us in connecting in love and using love as a healing agent in some of our psychological wounds. So I view it as a mission, and I try and get that across in my training. And I think it has a lot to teach us about what's really important in life.
Well, thank you for that message. I think that's really important. And I definitely want to agree with you on pretty much all of those points. And I do think that MDMA is a great tool to help people really realize that in a really deep and profound way and make lasting changes in their lives and in their relationships. And so thank you for putting out this book and for doing this work and for training other people to make this more accessible for folks who need it. Being in a relationship is hard. Long-term relationships, they're challenging, and they're going to challenge your sense of self, your sense of love, your sense of connection. But when you have it and it's mutually supporting and nurturing, it's the best part of being human.
Well said. Yeah, I totally agree.
All right. Well, thanks for your time today, Jonathan, and thank you for sending me the book so I could give it a read before we had this conversation. And it's been a delight to have you on. And I just want to encourage you to keep up with the good work. It sounds like you're doing some really important work there, and just want to encourage that. And for anybody who's listening who wants to get involved, what's the website again for the class?
For the class, mdmatraining.net.
And then for you?
And for me, XTC forcouples.net.
All right. Well, thank you, Jonathan. It's been a pleasure to have this conversation with you today.
Likewise. Thanks for the great questions, Martin.
All right.